Welcome to The Writer Reads, Mack and Me, an Odyssey, Book 2, Mack and Me, Blaedergil's Host, Chapter 22, Aftershock. With Delight tucked securely away, I headed to my quarters, Mack hovering at my side until I reached the door. To my surprise, he didn't just barge in like he normally did, but stopped and propped himself on the doorframe. When I stopped and looked back at him, he asked, "Are you okay?" Tans, standing behind him, had the same question written across his face. "I'm fine," I said. "When do you need me at the briefing?" "Half an hour. Get something to eat on the way over." I was about to ask where when Ten sent me the location, highlighted on a handy map. "Thanks," I said, and closed the door in their faces. "Honestly, you think I was breakable or something?" I was late to the meeting. Very late. Apparently, I am breakable. I collapsed in the shower and woke up back in the medbay in bed. Mac wasn't very impressed with me, but Doc said flashbacks, especially those with sensory augments, could do that. He also mentioned the SAN unit was a confined space, like the airlock, only smaller, and we were both idiots. Me for going in there in the first place, him for not thinking of it, and Tens for not calling him when Delight hit me with the memory to start with. Okay, so the three of us were idiots. Whatever. As far as Doc was concerned, we all had shit for brains. Yeah, thanks a lot, Doc. "Don't we have a briefing?" I asked, sitting up and then hastily pulling the sheet around me because I was dry, but I was still as naked as I had been when I'd stepped under the water. "You missed the briefing." Mac sounded annoyed. "So you're going without me?" I asked, and Mac smiled. "Oh, no," he said, "you're still going. You just get to follow my lead." I frowned. "Wouldn't it be better if I had a briefing?" Mac backed up a step and cocked his head. "Oh, I don't know. I think it would be more interesting to see you go in blind." I swung my feet over the edge of the bed. "In that case," I said, trying to maintain my dignity as I adjusted the sheet so it wouldn't fall off, "I'd better go and get changed." Mac reached out to grab me and I twisted under his hand and skipped out of range. No easy feat with a sheet trailing past my ankles. "You don't know how you're supposed to be dressed or what equipment you'll need," he protested. But I kept going, barely stopping to let the door open wide enough to let me through. "And whose fault is that?" I snapped back. I was tempted to give him the finger, except that would have meant letting go of the sheet, which would have meant flashing a whole lot more skin to the passing crew than I was comfortable with. Hell, I wasn't even comfortable in the sheet. I don't know how long it had taken Mac and Tens to come find me, but I didn't stink anymore. I just needed some clothes. Tens was snickering as he followed me out, but as far as I could tell, Mac hadn't moved an inch. "What do you want?" I snapped when Tens came alongside, and he raised his hands as though in surrender. "Briefing notes," he said, and sent the relevant file to my implant. "I'll catch you in the kaff." I muttered something more closely resembling a fuck you than a thank you, but I still think I would have punched him if he touched me. I didn't need any condescension right now, and compassion would only result in me in tears. I just needed to get through the briefing notes while I dressed, and then get my shit together before we had to go. It didn't take long. Tens had located where Andreas Caravan was holding Malari and then tracked where the antivirus had been sent. I was going into the labs of the Caravan Pharmaceutical Company, while Mac took a team down and pulled Malari out of the isolated mountain retreat in which Andreas had secluded her. I was wondering how the young Lord Caravan had managed to get any staff to work there, and then decided that he'd had to test the serum on someone and added another mental black mark to his name. Not that he'd care, but it mattered to me. I had a better idea of exactly what he was, and right now I wouldn't want him stuck to the underside of my boot. So, Mac to the mountain, Tens riding teleport duty on the ship, and me doing what I excelled at in training, retrieving stuff someone didn't want me to retrieve. Good. Got it. And then I saw where the pharma company was located and sat down, hard, on the floor. No fucking way. Which, of course, is when Mac decided to walk through my door. "Yes, fucking way," he said, and stopped as I scrambled to my feet. "You up to it or not?" I pulled the schematics up in my head, rotated the space station, and found the entrance I was looking for. Mack's expression became doubtful. They'll never expect it, I told him. Won't see it coming in a month of Sundays. Mack continued to regard me with a dubious stare. What? I asked, and then turned away from him so I could find some clothes. Mission like this, I was going to need. I reached out along the comm signal to access the station systems. Figured it wouldn't like being tickled, so added some code to randomize the route any tracking software might find and looked for a suitable patsy. Oh, oh my, a wolf ship. And those boys were just famous for their sweet and gentle natures. I snickered. Sweet and gentle, right? Not. I wondered what look Mac's face was wearing now and decided I didn't want to know. Once I was sure my interference couldn't be traced back to the Shady Marie, I wormed my way into the station's security system and piggybacked onto the feed from their security cameras. The concourse was full of your usual ship types with some security mixed right along in, but that wasn't the section I was going to try and blend in with. It took a couple of goes, but I eventually found the station section where the pharma company was housed. There was a concourse there as well, and a small series of docking bays, most of which were private berths reserved for company ships. You been given a slip yet? I asked over my shoulder. I still didn't turn around. Didn't need to. I knew Mac hadn't left because I could still feel his presence behind me. It was like a small thundercloud brewing up a major storm. Not that Mac was small, but hey, you get the picture. He didn't answer right away, and I guessed he was communicating with Case, given the pilot was the first one who'd be likely to know. While I waited, I compared what I had in the wardrobe with what I saw on the monitors, pulling the appropriate pieces out and setting them aside. The next problem I had was trying to work out how to fit them under the EVA suit without getting them rumpled enough to be noticed. You want to what? Well, so much for Matt keeping out of my head, I thought. At least the man had had enough sense not to nudge me while I'd been programming the routing diversion for the station's countermeasures. Curious, not stupid, Mac told me. Now, are you going to fill me in? There's a maintenance hatch beside one of the thrusters used for attitude adjustment, I said, referring to my entry point into the station. I'm going to EVA my way into that and then disappear into the storage room just beyond it and stash the EVA suit. I had dropped the sheet and pulled on the civilian clothes I would wear around the station. It wasn't easy, but I'd dressed in front of Mac before, so why should this time be any different? After all, it wasn't like he was interested. I moved away from that thought, tracking through the job ahead. After that, I'm going to take that ventilation shaft, and I highlighted the air ducts leading out of the storage closet and linking it to the ventilation in the pharma company, over to the lab where they're keeping the serum. Once I've got that, I'll either exit via the concourse or head back to the suit and EVA my way back out the maintenance hatch and into the ship. I finished buttoning the cream-coloured blouse that fitted in best with the fashions worn by the farmer's employees and dragged my combat suit closer. You can't wear that. You'll never fit in, Max said as I slid my feet into the legs, carefully tucking the hem of my office slacks down near the ankles. Last thing I wanted was for the fabric to bunch because those were a set of wrinkles I wouldn't be able to hide. I'm going into a set of potentially hostile air ducts. I am not doing it naked, and I'm not doing it without wearing something over my civvies. Those things need to be clean if I'm to blend in when I hit the lab. I kept dressing as I was talking, shrugging my way into the combat suit's top half and making sure I kept the sleeves of the blouse I had under it flat. How are you even going to know which lab you need? I'm going to hack the delivery manifests. I finished getting dressed as I spoke and started doing exactly that. They won't be on the main station server, Max said, and I walked back to the closet to find my boots. Like I needed to be told that. I needed a pair that sat at the midpoint between the combat boots I had and nice everyday or evening wear. Fortunately, the replicator was up to producing something that looked the part. Unfortunately, what it produced was nowhere near being the part. Nice, I muttered, sounding anything but pleased, but I put them on anyway and decided not to complain too loudly. At least they'd fit in the suit, no problems. I discovered that most of the caravan farmer's computer system was air-gapped, but that the desk at reception was not. It couldn't let me into the research systems, but it could let me see what packages had arrived and when, and what labs they'd been sent off to. It also let me see what classification each package had been given. There were three that fit the criteria for the parcel I was looking for: Two were right across the hall from each other, but the third was 2 levels down and right out on the end of the arm. That's the one, Max said, highlighting it in my implant. I'm going to need a different maintenance hatch. Are we going to discuss this in the cafe, or do I need to bring a couple of spare chairs and the coffee down there? Ken's pinged our implants, and he didn't sound too impressed, and now I remembered him saying he'd meet me. Almost done, I said as I looked over at Mac and headed for the storage drawers under the wardrobe. He wasn't too impressed as I started pulling stuff out of the compartment I'd built in the back. Weapons belong in the armory, he said, but I ignored him and pulled out the tools I'd slowly been collecting. The look on his face as I tucked them in their allotted spaces around the combat armor would have been entertaining, if it didn't mean he now knew what I spent my pay on and where I stored it. He smiled as I thought it, and I frowned. What? I'm in your implant, remember? I already knew about this stuff. What has always puzzled me is why you never take it with you when you run. Man had a point there, but I shrugged. Truth was, I couldn't say why. Unless I really thought about it, I guess. And I so wasn't going there. Why not? Mac pressed, and I slammed the last tool into its pocket, fastened it down tight, and stood up. Because it's none of your goddamned business, I snarled, and made for the door. It opened as I reached it, and Pritchard had his hand curled in the throat line of my collar and was lifting me up and stepping into the room even as I registered he was there.